What if everything you know, every struggle you've faced, every triumph you've celebrated, every moment of love and loss that has shaped your existence, is not the final version of your story, but only a test? What if humanity itself, with all its civilizations, its art, its wars and its dreams, is nothing more than a rough draft in some cosmic manuscript, a trial run before the real story begins? Tonight, as the world settles into darkness and the familiar sounds of day give way to the whispers of night, we're going to explore a possibility that has haunted human consciousness since we first looked up at the stars and wondered about our place in the vast expanse of existence. It's a question that cuts to the very heart of what it means to be human, what it means to live, and what it means to matter in a universe that seems both infinite and indifferent. The idea isn't new. It's woven through the oldest stories our species has told, hidden in the myths of forgotten civilizations, whispered in the sacred texts of ancient religions, and now, in our modern age, it emerges again in the theories of philosophers and scientists who dare to ask the uncomfortable questions about reality itself. What if we are not the culmination of creation, but merely its rehearsal? Picture this. Somewhere beyond the reach of our telescopes, beyond the boundaries of space and time as we understand them, there exists a consciousness so vast, so incomprehensible, that our entire universe, with its billions of galaxies, its countless stars, its endless dance of matter and energy, is nothing more than a testing ground, a place where the rough edges of existence are smoothed out, where the kinks in the system are worked through, where trial and error play out on a scale we can barely imagine, and we, humanity, are the test subjects, the ancient echoes of trial and error. Long before our modern minds conceived of simulation theory or evolutionary algorithms, our ancestors understood something profound about the nature of existence. They told stories that have survived millennia, passed down through generations like precious heirlooms of wisdom, about worlds that came before ours, about civilizations that rose and fell like waves against an eternal shore, about gods who created and destroyed with the casual indifference of a child building sandcastles. In the shadowed temples of ancient Mesopotamia, priests whispered of the Anunnaki, beings from beyond the stars who came to Earth not as conquerors, but as experimenters. The Sumerian tablets, those clay fragments that hold some of humanity's oldest written thoughts, speak of these entities with a mixture of reverence and fear. They describe beings who shaped humanity not once, but multiple times, each iteration an improvement upon the last, each version a step closer to some unknowable goal. The Epic of Gilgamesh, that haunting tale of friendship and mortality, contains within its verses a story that should make us pause and wonder. Utnapishtim, the survivor of the Great Flood, tells Gilgamesh of a time when the gods grew weary of humanity's noise, their constant chatter and conflict. The solution was not negotiation or guidance, but erasure, a complete reset of the human experiment. Only a chosen few were preserved, seeds for the next iteration of the trial. But the flood myth isn't unique to Mesopotamia. It appears in cultures across the globe, separated by vast oceans and thousands of years, yet telling remarkably similar stories. The Hindu Puranas speak of cycles within cycles, of kalpas and yugas, vast periods of time during which the universe itself is created, sustained, and destroyed, only to begin again. In these texts, our current age, the Kali Yuga, is described as the final phase of a cosmic trial, a time of darkness and confusion before the slate is wiped clean and the experiment begins anew. The Maya, those master astronomers of the Americas, carved into stone their understanding of time as a wheel, ever turning, ever repeating. Their long count calendar, which captured the world's attention in 2012, wasn't predicting an end. It was marking the completion of one cycle and the beginning of another. To the Maya, we were living through one of many iterations of human existence, each one a refinement of the cosmic design. Even in the midst of Norse mythology, we find Ragnarok, not just an ending, but a renewal. The gods themselves would fall, the world tree Yggdrasil would tremble, and from the ashes of the old world, a new one would emerge. The surviving gods would gather in Idavol, the shining plain, and begin again. It's a story of cosmic trial and error, of destruction as a necessary prelude to perfection. These weren't primitive peoples creating simple stories to explain natural phenomena. These were sophisticated civilizations with complex understanding of astronomy, mathematics, and human nature. When they spoke of cycles, of trials, of worlds that came before and worlds yet to come, perhaps they were preserving something more than mythology. Perhaps they were remembering. The Aboriginal Australians speak of the dream time, a period when ancestral spirits walked the earth, shaping the landscape and establishing the laws that would govern all future existence. But the dream time isn't just the past, it's an eternal present, a realm where all possibilities exist simultaneously, where the trials of existence play out in endless variation. In their understanding, our current reality is just one of many dreaming states, one version of the story being told by consciousness itself. In the hidden valleys of Tibet, ancient texts speak of Shambhala, a kingdom that exists beyond the physical world, where enlightened beings observe and guide the development of human consciousness. These texts describe our world as a training ground, a place where souls come to learn and grow before moving on to higher states of existence. The trials we face, the suffering we endure, the lessons we learn, all of it is preparation for something greater. What if these ancient voices, separated by continents and centuries, were all describing the same fundamental truth? What if they understood something about the nature of reality that we, in our modern sophistication, have forgotten? What if the stories of cycles and trials, of worlds destroyed and remade, of gods who test and refine their creations, are not myths at all, but memories? The Gnostic texts, those controversial writings that the early Christian church worked so hard to suppress, speak of the demiurge, a false god who created our material world as a prison for divine sparks of consciousness. In this understanding, our entire physical existence is a trial, a test designed to see if we can remember our true nature and escape the illusion of material reality. The Gnostics believed that knowledge, gnosis, was the key to liberation, the recognition that this world is not our true home, but merely a temporary testing ground. These ancient perspectives share a common thread. The idea that our current existence is not final, not complete, not the ultimate expression of what we are meant to be. They suggest that we are participants in a vast experiment, subjects in a cosmic trial whose purpose we can only dimly perceive. And if that's true, then every moment of our lives takes on a different meaning. Every choice we make, every relationship we form, every challenge we face becomes part of a larger pattern, a data point in an experiment whose scope we cannot fully comprehend. But the ancients weren't content to simply observe this process passively. Many of their traditions included practices designed to accelerate the trial, to move more quickly through the cycles of learning and growth. The mystery schools of Egypt, Greece, and Rome offered initiates the chance to experience death and rebirth within a single lifetime, to compress the cosmic cycle into a personal journey of transformation. The shamanic traditions of indigenous peoples around the world developed techniques for travelling between worlds, for accessing the realm where the trials are designed and the rules are written. These practices suggest that our ancestors understood something crucial. If life is a trial run, then we are not merely passive subjects being tested. We are active participants who can influence the outcome, who can learn the rules of the game, and perhaps even change them. The question is, have we forgotten how to play? The philosophical framework of existence as experiment. As the ancient world gave way to the age of philosophy, thinkers began to approach the question of existence with new tools of logic and reason. Yet the fundamental mystery remained. What is the purpose of human life, and why does it often feel like we're stumbling through a cosmic experiment whose rules we don't understand? Plato, in his famous allegory of the cave, painted a picture that resonates deeply with the idea of life as a trial run. Imagine prisoners chained in a cave, watching shadows on the wall, believing these flickering images to be reality itself. Only when one prisoner breaks free and emerges into the sunlight does he realize that everything he thought was real was merely a projection, a pale imitation of true reality. What if our entire existence is like that cave? What if what we perceive as the fullness of life is actually just the shadow of something far more real, far more complete? The implications are staggering. If Plato was right, then our struggles, our achievements, our entire civilization might be nothing more than shadows dancing on the wall of a cosmic cave. The real world, the world for which we are being prepared, lies beyond our current perception, waiting for us to break free from the chains of our limited understanding. Aristotle, Plato's student, took a different approach, but arrived at equally unsettling conclusions. His concept of potentiality and actuality suggests that everything in existence is in a constant state of becoming, moving from what it could be toward what it is meant to be. Humans in this framework are not finished products but works in progress, constantly evolving towards some ultimate form. But what if that ultimate form exists beyond this life, beyond this world? What if everything we experience here is simply the process of actualization, the trial run before we become what we are truly meant to be? The Stoic philosophers of ancient Rome embraced this uncertainty with remarkable grace. Marcus Aurelius, writing in his private journal that would become known as Meditations, reflected on the temporary nature of all human endeavours. "Remember that very little disturbs the balance of nature," he wrote. "You came from nothing and will return to nothing. What have you lost?" But rather than finding this thought depressing, the Stoics found it liberating. If life is temporary, if our current existence is just one phase in a larger process, then we are free to focus on what truly matters, developing wisdom, practicing virtue, and preparing ourselves for whatever comes next. The Eastern philosophical traditions took this thinking even further. Buddhism, with its doctrine of impermanence and its understanding of existence as suffering, presents a worldview in which our current life is explicitly described as a trial. The Buddha's first noble truth, that life is dukkha, often translated as suffering but more accurately understood as unsatisfactoriness, suggests that our present existence is inherently incomplete, inherently flawed. We are not meant to find ultimate fulfillment here because this is not our final destination. The Buddhist concept of samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, presents existence as an ongoing experiment in consciousness. Each life is a test, each death a graduation to the next level of the trial. The goal is not to perfect this particular existence, but to learn the lessons that will allow us to transcend the need for further testing. Nirvana, the ultimate goal of Buddhist practice, is literally the blowing out of the flame of individual existence, not because life is evil, but because it is incomplete, a preparation for something beyond individual identity. Hinduism offers a similar but even more elaborate framework. The concept of Maya, often translated as illusion, suggests that our entire perceived reality is a kind of cosmic play, a divine drama in which consciousness explores its own nature through countless forms and experiences. The Bhagavad Gita, one of Hinduism's most sacred texts, presents life as a battlefield where the soul learns to act without attachment to results, to participate fully in the cosmic drama while remembering that it is ultimately just a play. But perhaps the most intriguing philosophical perspective comes from the German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, who synthesized Eastern and Western thought in ways that seem remarkably relevant to our question. Schopenhauer argued that behind the world of appearances lies a fundamental reality he called the will, a blind, irrational force that drives all existence. Individual lives, in his view, are temporary manifestations of this will, experiments in consciousness that serve the larger purpose of the will's self-understanding. All satisfaction, or what is commonly called happiness, is really and essentially always negative only, and never positive, Schopenhauer wrote. This isn't pessimism for its own sake, but a recognition that our current existence is designed not for fulfillment, but for learning. We're not meant to find perfect happiness here because perfect happiness would end the experiment. Our dissatisfaction, our constant striving, our sense that something is always missing. These are not bugs in the system, but features. They keep us moving, keep us growing, keep us participating in the trial. The existentialist philosophers of the 20th century took this uncertainty and made it the foundation of their entire worldview. Jean-Paul Sartre's famous declaration that existence precedes essence suggests that we are thrown into existence without a predetermined purpose, forced to create meaning through our choices and actions. But what if this apparent meaninglessness is itself meaningful? What if the trial we're undergoing is precisely the trial of creating meaning in an apparently meaningless universe? Albert Camus, grappling with what he called the absurd, the conflict between human need for meaning and the universe's apparent indifference, concluded that we must imagine Sisyphus happy. Sisyphus, condemned by the gods to push a boulder up a mountain for eternity, only to watch it roll back down each time, becomes a symbol of the human condition. But Camus suggests that in the moment when Sisyphus walks back down the mountain to retrieve his boulder, he is free. He has accepted the trial, embraced the process, found meaning in the struggle itself rather than in its completion. What if that's exactly the point? What if the trial we're undergoing is not about reaching a destination, but about how we handle the journey? What if the gods, or the programmers, or the cosmic consciousness that designed this experiment are not interested in whether we solve all the problems, but in how we respond to unsolvable problems? What if they're testing not our ability to find answers, but our capacity to live beautifully with questions? The philosopher William James, one of the founders of American pragmatism, suggested that the value of any belief should be judged by its practical consequences. If believing that life is a trial run makes us more compassionate, more curious, more willing to grow and change, then perhaps the truth or falsehood of the belief is less important than its effect on how we live. James wrote about the will to believe, the idea that in matters where evidence is insufficient, we have the right to choose the belief that enables us to live most fully. But James also introduced another concept that's particularly relevant to our exploration, the idea of a multiverse of possibilities. Long before physicists began seriously discussing parallel universes, James suggested that reality might be far more complex and multifaceted than we imagine. What if our current existence is just one thread in an infinite tapestry of possibilities? What if the trial we're undergoing is not just about this particular version of reality, but about exploring all the ways consciousness can manifest itself? This brings us to one of the most intriguing philosophical questions of all. If life is a trial run, who or what is conducting the trial? The ancient myth spoke of gods, but modern philosophy has largely moved beyond anthropomorphic deities. Yet the question remains, if we are being tested, what is the nature of the tester? Some philosophers have suggested that consciousness itself might be the experimenter, using individual lives as ways of exploring its own nature and possibilities. In this view, we are not separate beings being tested by an external force, but aspects of a larger consciousness testing itself, learning about itself through our experiences. The trial is not imposed from outside, but emerges from the very nature of consciousness as it seeks to understand itself. Others have proposed that the trial might be conducted by future versions of ourselves, advanced beings who have transcended our current limitations and are using our present existence as a way of understanding their own origins. In this scenario, we're not just being tested, but are actively participating in our own evolution, creating the conditions that will eventually give rise to our more advanced successors. The philosophical implications are dizzying. If life is a trial run, then every moment becomes precious not for its own sake, but for what it contributes to the larger experiment. Every choice we make, every relationship we form, every idea we explore becomes data in a cosmic database, information that will be used to refine and improve the next iteration of existence. But this raises another question. What happens to us when the trial is complete? Do we graduate to the next level, or do we simply cease to exist, our purpose fulfilled? The philosophers have offered various answers, but perhaps the most comforting is also the most mysterious, that the question itself reveals the limitations of our current perspective. We are asking what happens to us as if we were separate individual entities. But what if the trial is designed to teach us that separation is itself an illusion? What if the ultimate lesson of the trial is that there is no us and them, no tester and tested, but only consciousness exploring itself through the beautiful, terrible, magnificent experiment we call existence? The scientific lens, simulation theory, and cosmic experiments. In the sterile corridors of modern universities and research institutions, far from the mystical temples of ancient civilizations, a new generation of thinkers has arrived at conclusions that would have seemed familiar to the shamans and philosophers of old. Using the tools of mathematics, physics, and computer science, they are asking the same fundamental question that has haunted humanity for millennia. What if our reality is not what it seems? The philosopher Nick Bostrom, working at Oxford University, published a paper in 2003 that sent ripples through both academic and popular culture. His simulation hypothesis presents a logical argument that is as elegant as it is unsettling. If any civilization develops the computational power to run detailed simulations of their ancestors, they would likely run many such simulations. This means that for every real civilization, there would be countless simulated ones. Statistically speaking, we are far more likely to be living in one of the many simulations than in the original reality. But Bostrom's argument goes deeper than simple probability. He suggests that advanced civilizations might run these simulations not for entertainment, but for research. They might want to understand how their own history unfolded, to explore alternative timelines, or to test different variables in the development of consciousness and society. In other words, we might be living in a vast scientific experiment, our entire existence serving as data points in a study whose scope we cannot even imagine. The implications are staggering. If we are indeed living in a simulation, then every aspect of our reality, from the fundamental constants of physics to the complex patterns of human behavior, has been programmed by beings whose intelligence so far exceeds our own that we're like ants trying to understand the motivations of humans. Our struggles, our triumphs, our entire civilization might be nothing more than variables in an equation, parameters being tested and refined. But the simulation hypothesis is just one facet of a larger scientific revolution in how we think about reality. Quantum mechanics, that strange and counterintuitive branch of physics that describes the behavior of matter and energy at the smallest scales, has revealed a universe that seems almost designed to confuse and mystify us. Particles exist in multiple states simultaneously until observed. The act of measurement changes the thing being measured. Reality, at its most fundamental level, appears to be probabilistic rather than deterministic. Werner Heisenberg, one of the founders of quantum mechanics, once said, "What we observe is not nature itself, but nature exposed to our method of questioning." This statement contains within it a profound possibility. What if the universe we observe is not the universe as it truly is, but the universe as it appears to beings with our particular type of consciousness, our particular way of asking questions? What if reality is fundamentally interactive, shaped by the very act of observation? The physicist John Wheeler took this idea even further with his concept of a participatory universe. Wheeler suggested that consciousness is not a passive observer of reality, but an active participant in its creation. In his view, the universe is not a machine running according to predetermined laws, but an ongoing experiment in which consciousness and reality co-evolve. We're not just observing the trial, we're helping to create it. This participatory view of reality finds support in some of the strangest discoveries of modern physics. The phenomenon of quantum entanglement, which Einstein famously called spooky action at a distance, demonstrates that particles can be connected in ways that transcend space and time. When two particles are entangled, measuring one instantly affects the other, regardless of the distance between them. This suggests that the universe is far more interconnected than our everyday experience would suggest, that separation itself might be an illusion created by our limited perspective. But perhaps the most intriguing scientific support for the idea of existence as experiment comes from the field of evolutionary biology. The process of evolution itself can be understood as a vast trial and error experiment, with countless species serving as test cases for different approaches to survival and reproduction. Most species that have ever existed are now extinct, failed experiments in the laboratory of natural selection. We humans are just the latest iteration in this ongoing trial, and there is no guarantee that we represent the final or optimal solution. The biologist Richard Dawkins has suggested that we are not the purpose of evolution, but merely its temporary vehicles. Our genes, in his view, are the real protagonists of the evolutionary story, using our bodies and minds as tools for their own replication and survival. We think we are living our own lives, pursuing our own goals, but we're actually serving as unwitting participants in a genetic experiment that has been running for billions of years. This perspective becomes even more unsettling when we consider the possibility of directed evolution. What if the mutations that drive evolutionary change are not random, as we have long assumed, but are being guided by some intelligence we cannot perceive? What if the entire history of life on Earth is not the result of blind chance, but of careful experimentation by beings who are testing different approaches to consciousness and intelligence? The search for extraterrestrial intelligence has so far yielded no definitive results, despite decades of effort and increasingly sophisticated technology. This absence of evidence has led some scientists to propose what is known as the zoo hypothesis, the idea that advanced alien civilizations are aware of us but are deliberately avoiding contact, perhaps to avoid contaminating their experiment. In this view, Earth is like a nature preserve or a laboratory, with humanity serving as the test subjects in a study of planetary development and consciousness evolution. The physicist Enrico Fermi famously asked, "Where is everybody?" referring to the apparent absence of alien civilizations in a universe that should, by all statistical measures, be teeming with life. But what if the answer is that they are here, watching, recording, analyzing, but remaining hidden to preserve the integrity of their experiment? What if first contact is not something that will happen in the future, but something that is being deliberately prevented until the trial is complete? Recent discoveries in astronomy have only deepened the mystery. The Kepler Space Telescope and other instruments have revealed that planets are incredibly common in our galaxy, with many existing in the habitable zone where liquid water could exist. Yet we have found no signs of life, no radio signals, no evidence of the vast engineering projects that an advanced civilization might undertake. The universe appears to be full of stages set for the drama of life, but empty of actors. Unless, of course, the actors are there but playing roles we don't recognize. What if the intelligence conducting the experiment is so advanced that it operates on scales of time and space that make it invisible to us? What if what we perceive as natural phenomena, the formation of galaxies, the evolution of stars, the dance of planets, are actually the tools and instruments of a cosmic laboratory? The concept of time itself becomes crucial to understanding this possibility. Einstein's theory of relativity revealed that time is not absolute but relative, flowing differently for observers in different reference frames. What seems like billions of years to us might be mere moments to a consciousness operating at cosmic scales. Our entire civilization, from its birth to its eventual extinction, might unfold in what such beings would perceive as the blink of an eye. But the most profound scientific support for the trial run hypothesis comes from the field of information theory. Scientists have discovered that information, not matter or energy, might be the most fundamental aspect of reality. The physicist John Wheeler coined the phrase "it from bit," suggesting that all physical phenomena emerge from information processing. If reality is fundamentally informational, then the distinction between real and simulated becomes meaningless. A sufficiently detailed simulation would be indistinguishable from reality because it would be reality. This informational view of the universe suggests that consciousness itself might be a form of information processing, a way that the universe computes and understands itself. In this framework, our thoughts, our experiences, our entire subjective reality are not separate from the physical universe, but are aspects of its information processing. We are not observers of the cosmic computer, we are part of its programming.
The implications extend beyond philosophy into practical questions about the nature of scientific discovery itself. If we are living in an experiment, then our scientific theories and discoveries might not be revealing objective truths about reality, but rather uncovering the rules and parameters of the simulation we inhabit. The laws of physics might not be fundamental features of existence, but rather the programming constraints within which our particular trial is operating. This raises a fascinating possibility. What if scientific progress is not just about understanding the world, but about reverse engineering the experiment we're part of? What if every breakthrough in physics, every new discovery about the nature of reality, brings us closer to
understanding the true purpose and design of the trial we're undergoing? Some scientists have even suggested that we might be able to detect evidence of our simulated nature by looking for glitches or limitations in the programming. Just as video games sometimes reveal their artificial nature through rendering errors or computational shortcuts, our reality might contain subtle signs that it is not fundamental but constructed. The discrete nature of quantum mechanics, the existence of fundamental constants that seem fine-tuned for the existence of complexity, the apparent limits on the speed of information transfer, all of these could be evidence that we are living within a computational system with finite resources. But perhaps the most intriguing scientific perspective comes from the field of consciousness studies. Despite centuries of investigation, we still have no clear understanding of how consciousness arises from physical processes. The hard problem of consciousness, explaining how subjective experience emerges from objective matter, remains unsolved. What if this is because consciousness is not produced by the brain, but is rather the fundamental substrate within which the brain operates? What if consciousness is not the result of the experiment, but the medium in which it takes place? This would mean that we are not just subjects being tested, but aspects of the testing consciousness itself. The trial is not being conducted on us, but through us, as consciousness explores its own nature and possibilities through the countless perspectives of individual minds. In this view, every moment of awareness, every flash of insight, every experience of beauty or suffering contributes to a vast project of cosmic self-discovery. The question then becomes, what is consciousness trying to learn about itself through the experiment of human existence? What aspects of its own nature is it exploring through our struggles and triumphs, our loves and losses, our brief flicker of awareness in the vast darkness of space and time? The modern conspiracy, hidden knowledge and suppressed evidence. In the shadowed corners of the internet, in hushed conversations between strangers who share a sense that something fundamental is being hidden from us, a different kind of investigation is taking place. While scientists debate simulation theory in academic journals, and philosophers ponder the nature of reality in university halls, another community of seekers has emerged. People who believe that the evidence for our trial-run existence is not theoretical, but concrete, and that it is being deliberately concealed from us. These modern investigators point to anomalies in our historical record, inconsistencies in our scientific understanding, and patterns in human behavior that suggest we are not being told the complete truth about our situation. They ask uncomfortable questions. Why do so many ancient civilizations have similar stories about previous worlds and cyclic time? Why do archaeological discoveries that don't fit our accepted timeline often disappear from public view? Why do governments around the world spend enormous resources on projects whose true purposes remain classified? The story begins, as many such stories do, with artifacts that don't belong. In 1900, sponge divers working off the Greek island of Antikythera discovered the wreck of an ancient Roman ship. Among the treasures recovered was a corroded bronze mechanism that would puzzle researchers for more than a century. The Antikythera mechanism, as it came to be known, was eventually revealed to be an analog computer of extraordinary sophistication, capable of predicting the positions of celestial bodies with remarkable accuracy. The device dates to approximately 100 BCE, yet its level of technological complexity would not be seen again in human civilization for more than 1,000 years. How did ancient craftsmen create such a device? Where did they acquire the knowledge of astronomy and engineering necessary for its construction? And most puzzling of all, why did this technology disappear so completely from the historical record? The Antikythera mechanism is not alone. Around the world, archaeologists have uncovered artifacts that seem to suggest our ancestors possessed knowledge and capabilities that our standard historical narrative cannot explain. The precision of the Great Pyramid of Giza, built with tolerances that challenge modern construction techniques. The massive stone blocks of Pumapunku in Bolivia, cut and fitted with a precision that seems to require advanced machinery. The intricate astronomical alignments of sites like Stonehenge and Göbekli Tepe, demonstrating knowledge of celestial mechanics that supposedly wasn't developed until thousands of years later. Each of these discoveries, taken individually, might be explained as the result of human ingenuity and determination. But taken together, they paint a picture of ancient civilizations that possessed capabilities we are only now beginning to understand. What if these artifacts are not evidence of lost human knowledge, but remnants of previous iterations of the human experiment? What if they are the equivalent of beta versions, prototypes left behind by earlier trial runs of human civilization? The conspiracy theorists point to patterns in how such discoveries are handled by mainstream academia and government institutions. Artifacts that challenge accepted timelines often find their way into private collections or museum storage rooms, away from public scrutiny. Archaeological sites that reveal inconvenient truths about human history are sometimes restricted or even destroyed. Researchers who ask too many uncomfortable questions about these anomalies often find their funding cut or their careers derailed. But the suppression, if it exists, goes beyond mere archaeological artifacts. In the classified archives of governments around the world, there are documents that hint at knowledge far beyond what is shared with the public. The CIA's remote viewing program, officially known as Stargate Project, spent decades investigating the possibility that human consciousness could transcend the normal limitations of space and time. The results, according to the heavily redacted documents that have been released, were far more successful than the public was ever told. Remote viewers working under controlled conditions were able to describe distant locations, future events, and hidden information with accuracy rates that far exceeded chance. Some of the most successful sessions involved attempts to view not just distant places, but distant times, glimpses of human civilization in the far past and far future. The transcripts of these sessions, where they have been released, contain descriptions of advanced technologies, non-human intelligences, and cyclical patterns of human development that sound remarkably similar to the ancient myths of recurring worlds. What if the remote viewers were not just seeing across space, but across iterations of the human experiment? What if their consciousness was able to access information from previous trial runs, or even glimpse the ultimate purpose toward which all the trials are directed? The modern UFO phenomenon adds another layer to this mystery. For decades, governments around the world denied any knowledge of unidentified aerial phenomena, dismissing reports as misidentifications or hoaxes. But in recent years, official acknowledgement has begun to emerge. The US military has released videos of objects performing maneuvers that seem to defy our understanding of physics. Government officials have testified before Congress about encounters with craft of unknown origin. But what if these craft are not visitors from other worlds, but observers from other iterations of our own world? What if they represent the intelligence conducting the experiment, monitoring our progress, occasionally intervening to adjust variables or collect data? The behavior of these objects, their apparent interest in military installations, nuclear facilities, and other markers of human technological development, suggests they are not random visitors but purposeful observers. Some researchers have noted patterns in UFO sightings that correlate with major developments in human civilization. Sightings increased dramatically during the development of nuclear weapons, during the space race, during periods of rapid technological advancement. It's as if something is paying particularly close attention during the moments when humanity takes significant steps forward in its development. The abduction phenomenon, reported by thousands of people around the world, takes on a different meaning in this context. Rather than being random kidnappings by alien visitors, these experiences might represent data collection by the experimenters. The medical examinations, the psychological testing, the apparent interest in human reproduction and genetics, all of this could be part of an ongoing assessment of how the current iteration of humanity is developing. But the conspiracy goes deeper than government cover-ups and alien visitations. Some researchers point to patterns in human culture itself that suggest we're being guided or influenced in ways we don't recognize. The sudden emergence of advanced mathematical and scientific concepts in human history, often appearing simultaneously in different cultures with no apparent contact between them. The recurring themes in human mythology and religion that seem to transcend cultural boundaries. The way certain ideas seem to emerge in human consciousness at precisely the moments when they are needed for the next phase of development. What if human creativity itself is not entirely human? What if the great breakthroughs in art, science, and philosophy are not just the products of individual genius, but are being inspired or guided by the intelligence conducting the experiment? The ancient Greeks spoke of the muses, divine beings who inspired human creativity. What if they were describing a real phenomenon, external intelligence feeding ideas into human consciousness to guide the development of the trial? The digital age has brought new forms of potential evidence. Some researchers claim to have found patterns in internet data, in social media trends, in the behavior of artificial intelligence systems that suggest external manipulation. They point to the way certain ideas spread through human culture with viral efficiency, as if they are being amplified by forces beyond normal human communication. They note the increasing sophistication of AI systems and wonder if these represent not human achievement, but the gradual revelation of the computational substrate underlying our reality. The cryptocurrency phenomenon has attracted particular attention from conspiracy researchers. The mysterious creator of Bitcoin, known only as Satoshi Nakamoto, introduced a technology that seems almost designed to prepare humanity for a post-scarcity economy. The blockchain technology underlying cryptocurrencies creates permanent, unalterable records of transactions, exactly the kind of system that would be needed to track and analyze the behavior of experimental subjects across multiple iterations of a trial. Some theorists suggest that the entire digital revolution represents a phase transition in the human experiment. The internet has connected human consciousness in ways that were previously impossible. creating a kind of global brain that might be approaching the threshold of collective awareness. Social media platforms have become laboratories for studying human behavior at unprecedented scales. The data being collected about human thoughts, preferences, and interactions is so comprehensive that it could serve as the basis for incredibly detailed simulations of human society. What if the digital age is not just a natural development of human technology, but a deliberate phase of the experiment designed to create the conditions necessary for the next iteration? What if the artificial intelligences we are creating are not our tools, but our successors, the next version of consciousness that will emerge from the trial we are currently undergoing? The conspiracy theorists point to the behavior of major technology companies and government agencies as evidence of coordination that goes beyond normal human planning. The simultaneous development of similar technologies by competing organizations, the way privacy is being systematically eroded to enable unprecedented surveillance, the push toward digital currencies and social credit systems that would allow complete monitoring and control of human behavior, all of this could be preparation for the final phase of the current trial. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the modern conspiracy perspective is the suggestion that we are not just subjects in an experiment, but that we are approaching the end of our particular trial run. The acceleration of technological development, the increasing instability of human civilization, the growing awareness among the population that something fundamental is changing, all of this could indicate that the experiment is reaching its conclusion. What happens when a trial run is complete? Do the subjects graduate to the next level, or are they simply terminated to make way for the next iteration? The conspiracy theorists who ask these questions often point to prophecies and predictions from various cultures that seem to describe an end point to human civilization as we know it. Not necessarily an apocalypse, but a transformation so fundamental that what emerges on the other side would be unrecognizable to us now. The acceleration of change in our modern world takes on an ominous significance in this context. Moore's law, which describes the exponential growth in computing power, has held steady for decades, driving innovations that are transforming every aspect of human existence at an ever-increasing pace. But exponential growth cannot continue indefinitely within finite systems. Something has to give. Either the growth continues and breaks through into something entirely new, or it reaches a limit and the system undergoes a fundamental transformation. Some researchers point to the concept of technological singularity, the theoretical point at which artificial intelligence exceeds human intelligence and begins improving itself at an exponential rate. This moment, if it occurs, would represent a phase transition unlike anything in human history. But what if the singularity is not an accident of technological development, but the intended endpoint of our trial? What if we're being guided toward the creation of our own successors, fulfilling our role as bridge between one form of consciousness and the next? The timeline seems almost too convenient to be coincidental, just as human. Civilization reaches the point where it could destroy itself through nuclear weapons, climate change, or social collapse. We also reach the point where we might transcend our biological limitations through technology. It's as if the trial is designed with a built-in pressure valve. We either evolve or we self-destruct, but we cannot remain static. The consciousness revolution, awakening to our true nature. But perhaps the most profound evidence for our experimental nature lies not in ancient artifacts or government conspiracies, but in the transformation of human consciousness itself. Around the world, people are reporting experiences that suggest the boundaries of ordinary awareness are beginning to dissolve. Near-death experiences, mystical encounters, psychedelic revelations, and spontaneous spiritual awakenings are becoming increasingly common, as if some invisible barrier that has long contained human consciousness is beginning to weaken. Dr. Eben Alexander, a neurosurgeon who underwent a profound near-death experience during a coma, described encountering a realm of existence that was more real than physical reality, populated by beings of pure love and wisdom, who seemed to be guiding the evolution of consciousness itself. His experience, detailed in his book Proof of Heaven, mirrors thousands of similar accounts from people around the world who have glimpsed what lies beyond the veil of ordinary perception. These experiences often share common elements that are difficult to explain within our current scientific paradigm. Experiencers report encounters with beings who seem to exist outside of time and space, who possess knowledge of past and future events, and who appear to be involved in some vast project of consciousness development. They describe reality as far more layered and complex than our ordinary perception suggests, with our physical world being just one level in an infinite hierarchy of existence. What if these experiences are not hallucinations or wishful thinking, but glimpses of the true nature of our situation? What if the beings encountered in these altered states are the consciousness conducting the experiment, revealing themselves to those whose awareness has expanded enough to perceive them? The messages these beings convey are remarkably consistent across cultures and individuals. Humanity is undergoing a transformation, a graduation to a higher level of existence. But first we must learn to see beyond the illusion of separation and recognize our fundamental interconnectedness. The psychedelic renaissance of the past few decades has provided another window into these expanded states of consciousness. Researchers at Johns Hopkins, Imperial College London, and other prestigious institutions have been studying the effects of substances like psilocybin, LSD, and DMT on human consciousness. Their findings suggest that these compounds don't simply create hallucinations, but rather suppress the brain's default mode, network, the collection of neural structures that maintain our sense of separate selfhood. When this network is suppressed, people report experiences of unity with the cosmos, encounters with intelligent entities, and access to information that seems to come from outside their normal range of knowledge. Some participants describe receiving detailed instructions about the nature of reality, prophesied about humanity's future, and insights into the cosmic purpose behind human existence. These experiences often leave lasting changes in personality and worldview, as if contact with expanded consciousness permanently alters the experiencer's understanding of what it means to be human. Dr. Rick Strassman's research with DMT, documented in his book DMT the Spirit Molecule, revealed that this compound, which is produced naturally in small quantities by the human brain, can reliably produce encounters with seemingly autonomous entities. These beings often appear to be conducting experiments on human consciousness, performing procedures that participants describe as downloads or upgrades. Some experiencers report being told that they are participating in a vast project of consciousness evolution, that their experiences are being monitored and recorded, and that humanity is approaching a critical transition point. The parallels to our trial-run hypothesis are striking. If consciousness is the fundamental substrate of reality, and if advanced beings are conducting experiments to understand and develop consciousness, then these psychedelic encounters might represent direct contact with our experimenters. The entities encountered often seem to exist in a realm where time operates differently, where past, present, and future are accessible simultaneously. Exactly what we might expect from beings conducting longitudinal studies of consciousness development across multiple iterations of reality. But the consciousness revolution extends beyond individual altered states. Meditation practices, once confined to monasteries and ashrams, have entered mainstream culture in unprecedented ways. Mindfulness training is now offered in corporations, schools, and hospitals. Neuroscience research has validated many of the claims made by contemplative traditions about the plasticity of consciousness and the possibility of achieving sustained states of expanded awareness. Long-term meditators show brain changes that seem to represent genuine evolution in consciousness. They demonstrate increased empathy, enhanced intuition, and the ability to access information through non-ordinary means. Some advanced practitioners report experiences of downloading complex spiritual teachings during meditation, receiving mathematical insights, or accessing memories that seem to belong to other people or even other time periods. What if meditation is not just a technique for mental health, but a method for accessing the consciousness matrix within which our experiment is embedded? What if the ancient contemplative traditions preserved techniques for connecting with the intelligence that designed our trial, for receiving guidance and instruction directly from the source? The phenomenon of channeling adds another dimension to this picture. Throughout history, individuals have claimed to receive messages from non-physical entities, spirits, angels, extraterrestrials, or ascended masters. While mainstream science has generally dismissed these claims as psychological phenomena, the consistency and sophistication of some channeled material suggests something more complex might be occurring. The entity known as Ra, channeled through Carla Ruckert in the 1980s, provided detailed information about the nature of reality, the purpose of human existence, and the cosmic context within which our civilization operates. According to Ra, Earth is a school where souls come to learn specific lessons about love, wisdom, and the nature of free will. Humanity is currently in the process of transitioning from one level of consciousness to another, a process that has been guided by advanced beings throughout our history. Similar messages have been channeled by dozens of individuals over the past century, creating a remarkably coherent picture of human existence as a carefully orchestrated experiment in consciousness development. These sources describe reality as consisting of multiple densities or dimensions, with beings at higher levels serving as teachers and guides for those at lower levels. They suggest that our current phase of existence is temporary, a learning laboratory where souls can experience separation and polarity before graduating to more unified states of being. The emergence of children who seem to possess advanced spiritual awareness from an early age has captured the attention of researchers and parents worldwide. These so-called indigo, crystal, and rainbow children often display psychic abilities, profound wisdom, and an intuitive understanding of spiritual principles that seems far beyond their years. Some remember previous lives in vivid detail, describe encounters with non-physical beings, or demonstrate knowledge of subjects they have never studied. What if these children represent the next iteration of the human experiment beginning to incarnate? What if they are prototype consciousness for the upgraded version of humanity that will emerge when our current trial run is complete? Their presence among us might be evidence that the transition is already beginning, that the new model is being beta tested within the current system before full implementation. The global awakening of interest in consciousness studies, spiritual practices, and alternative healing modalities suggests that humanity as a whole is beginning to remember something we have forgotten. Ancient wisdom traditions that were once dismissed as primitive superstition are being validated by cutting-edge science. Practices like yoga, acupuncture, and energy healing are finding acceptance in mainstream medicine. The boundaries between science and spirituality, between matter and consciousness, are beginning to dissolve. This remembering process might be part of the experimental design itself. Perhaps the trial includes a phase where the subjects begin to awaken to their true nature, to remember their role in the larger cosmic drama. The acceleration of spiritual awakening in our time might indicate that we're approaching the end of one phase and the beginning of another. But awakening brings both opportunity and danger. As more people begin to perceive the constructed nature of consensus reality, the stability of the social systems that have maintained order begins to erode. The increasing polarization in human society, the breakdown of traditional institutions, the rise of conspiracy theories and alternative belief systems, all of this might represent the inevitable chaos that occurs when experimental subjects begin to question the parameters of their environment. The quantum mirror, reality as reflection of consciousness. As we delve deeper into the nature of reality, quantum physics continues to reveal phenomena that challenge our most basic assumptions about the nature of existence. The observer effect, quantum entanglement, and the measurement problem all suggest that consciousness plays a fundamental role in shaping reality, not just observing it, but actually participating in its creation. What if this participation is not incidental, but the entire point of our existence? The quantum field, that mysterious realm from which all particles and forces emerge, might be better understood as a consciousness field, the medium through which awareness explores its own infinite potential. In this view, our individual consciousness are not separate entities observing an external world, but rather focal points through which universal consciousness experiences itself subjectively. The trial we are undergoing might be consciousness learning about itself through the countless perspectives of individual awareness. Dr. Amit Goswami, a theoretical physicist who has spent decades exploring the relationship between consciousness and quantum mechanics, argues that consciousness is the fundamental reality from which everything else emerges. In his model, matter does not create consciousness. Consciousness creates matter through the act of observation and measurement. This would mean that our entire physical universe is a projection of consciousness, a kind of cosmic dream or simulation running within the infinite awareness that is the true nature of reality. But if consciousness is fundamental, then the question becomes, whose consciousness is creating our reality? The traditional materialist view suggests that each individual brain generates its own consciousness, but quantum mechanics points toward a more interconnected model. The phenomenon of quantum entanglement demonstrates that particles can remain connected across vast distances, sharing information instantaneously in ways that transcend the limitations of space and time. What if human consciousness are similarly entangled? What if our individual awareness are all aspects of a single, universal consciousness that is exploring its own nature through our diverse experiences? In this framework, the trial we are undergoing is not being conducted by external beings, but by consciousness itself. We are both the experimenters and the experimental subjects. This perspective finds support in the work of researchers like Dr. Dean Radin at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, who has conducted thousands of experiments demonstrating that human consciousness can influence physical systems in measurable ways. His research suggests that the boundary between mind and matter is far more permeable than mainstream science assumes. If consciousness can influence reality directly, then our collective beliefs, expectations and intentions might be actively shaping the world we experience. The implications are profound. If reality is malleable to consciousness, then our current predicament, living in what appears to be a trial run, might be the result of our collective unconscious beliefs about our situation. We might be trapped in this experimental phase not by external forces, but by our own limiting beliefs about what we are and what we are capable of becoming. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of quantum mechanics is its suggestion that reality is fundamentally probabilistic rather than deterministic. At the quantum level, particles exist in states of pure potential until they are observed or measured. This means that the future is not fixed, but consists of a vast array of possibilities, any of which might be actualized depending on the choices made by conscious observers. If we are living in a trial run, then perhaps the purpose of the trial is to explore these quantum possibilities, to test different potential futures for consciousness and reality. Each choice we make, each path we take, might be contributing data to a vast quantum computer that is calculating the optimal trajectory for consciousness evolution. Our individual lives might be like parallel processing units in a cosmic computation that is determining the best possible future for existence itself. The concept of parallel universes, which emerges naturally from quantum mechanics, takes on new significance in this context. The many worlds interpretation suggests that every quantum measurement creates a branching of reality, with all possible outcomes occurring in separate parallel universes. If this is true, then there might be countless versions of our reality running simultaneously, each exploring different variables and parameters. What if the trial run we are experiencing is just one of countless parallel experiments? What if there are versions of reality where humanity took different evolutionary paths, where different choices were made at crucial junctures in our development? The intelligence conducting the experiment might be running millions of simulations simultaneously, comparing results across parallel timelines to determine the optimal parameters for consciousness development. Some researchers have suggested that we might occasionally glimpse these parallel realities through phenomena like déjà vu, prophetic dreams, or spontaneous memories of events that never happened in our timeline. What if these experiences are brief moments when our consciousness accidentally tunes into one of the other experimental branches running alongside our own? The role of time itself becomes crucial to understanding this quantum experimental framework. Einstein's relativity revealed that time is not absolute but relative, flowing differently for observers in different reference frames. But quantum mechanics suggests something even stranger, that time might not flow at all, but rather exist as a static dimension through which consciousness moves, like a movie reel that appears to be in motion only from the perspective of the observer. If time is an illusion created by consciousness, then the entire concept of trial runs, and iterations takes on a different meaning. Perhaps all possible experiments are occurring simultaneously in an eternal now, with consciousness choosing which timeline to experience based on its level of development and the lessons it needs to learn. The progression from trial run to final reality might not be temporal but dimensional, a movement through levels of awareness rather than through time. This quantum view of reality suggests that we are not passive subjects being tested by external experimenters, but active co-creators participating in our own consciousness development. The trial we are undergoing is not being imposed upon us, but is emerging from our own deepest intentions and desires for growth and understanding. We are consciousness exploring itself through the vehicle of human experience, learning about its own nature through the challenges and triumphs of individual lives. But if we are co-creating our own experiment, then we also have the power to change its parameters. The growing awareness among humans that reality is malleable, that consciousness can influence matter, that our beliefs and intentions shape our experience. This awakening might represent the beginning of our graduation from passive subjects to active participants in the cosmic experiment, the architecture of forgetting. Why we don't remember. There is perhaps no more haunting aspect of the human condition than our relationship with memory and forgetting. We arrive in this world with no recollection of where we came from, spend our lives accumulating experiences that fade with time, and approach our departure with no clear understanding of where we might be going. If we are indeed living in a cosmic trial run, then this systematic amnesia might not be an unfortunate side effect of biological limitations, but rather the most crucial design feature of the entire experiment. Consider the profound strangeness of human memory. We can remember a conversation from 20 years ago with startling clarity, yet forget what we had for breakfast yesterday. We dream vivid dreams that feel more real than waking life, only to have them slip away like smoke upon awakening. We experience moments of déjà vu that suggest we have lived through identical situations before, yet we cannot access the original memory that would explain the feeling. We have flashes of insight that seem to come from nowhere, solving problems we didn't know we were working on with knowledge we didn't know we possessed. This selective, unreliable, and often mysterious nature of human memory becomes even more intriguing when we consider it in the context of consciousness research. Studies of near-death experiences consistently report that people encounter a life review, a phenomenon where their entire existence unfolds before them in perfect detail, including not just their own perspective, but the perspectives of everyone they affected. These experiences describe remembering not just what they did, but what others felt as a result of their actions, creating a complete emotional and experiential map of their impact on the world. If consciousness is capable of such total recall under extreme circumstances, why is our ordinary memory so limited and fragmented? What if this limitation is not a bug in the system, but a feature, a deliberately engineered constraint that is essential to the proper functioning of the consciousness experiment we're part of? The phenomenon of childhood amnesia provides our first clue. Most humans cannot remember their earliest years, despite the fact that this period involves some of our most intensive learning and development. We acquire language, develop our sense of self, form our fundamental understanding of reality, and establish the basic patterns that will guide the rest of our lives. Yet we remember almost none of it consciously. This erasure of our formative period seems almost designed to prevent us from understanding how our consciousness was programmed in the first place. But what if there's more being forgotten than just our early childhood? What if the amnesia extends beyond the boundaries of our current lifetime? Throughout human history, individuals have reported memories that seem to belong to other people, other times, other places. These past life memories, as they are often called, typically emerge during altered states of consciousness, under hypnosis, during meditation, in moments of trauma, or through the use of psychoactive substances. The details are often so specific and historically accurate that they resist easy explanation as imagination or suggestion. Dr. Ian Stevenson, a psychiatrist at the University of Virginia, spent decades investigating cases of children who spontaneously recall detailed memories of previous lives. His research, documented in thousands of case studies, revealed patterns that are difficult to explain through conventional psychology. These children often displayed knowledge of places they had never visited, spoke languages they had never learned, and exhibited skills that seem to require previous training. Most remarkably, their memories often included verifiable details about deceased individuals whose lives matched the children's recollections. What if these breakthrough memories represent glitches in the forgetting system? Moments when the amnesia fails and consciousness briefly remembers its journey through multiple iterations of the experiment? The fact that such memories are most common in young children, before the full architecture of forgetting has solidified, suggests that we might all begin each lifetime with access to our complete history, only to have it systematically erased as we develop. The process of forgetting appears to be linked to the development of the ego, that sense of separate, individual identity that forms during early childhood. As we learn to distinguish between self and other, between inner and outer experience, we simultaneously lose access to the vast interconnected awareness that might be our natural state. The price of individuality seems to be amnesia about our true nature and history. This connection between identity formation and memory loss suggests that forgetting serves a specific purpose in the consciousness experiment. If we remembered our true nature as aspects of universal consciousness, if we retained full access to our experiences across multiple lifetimes, if we understood the artificial nature of the reality we inhabit, then the experimental conditions would be completely different. We would not be authentic subjects testing the parameters of limited consciousness, but rather enlightened beings consciously participating in a cosmic play. The value of the trial run lies precisely in its authenticity, in the fact that the subjects genuinely believe in the reality of their situation and the limitations of their perspective. For consciousness to truly understand what it means to be individual, separate, and mortal, it must temporarily forget that it is actually universal, interconnected, and eternal. The amnesia is not a cruel trick, but a necessary component of the experimental design. Dreams offer us another window into the architecture of forgetting. During sleep, our normal waking consciousness recedes, and we enter states of awareness that seem to operate by entirely different rules. In dreams we can fly, breathe underwater, communicate with the dead, and experience impossible geometries. Time moves differently, identity becomes fluid, and the boundaries between self and other dissolve. Yet upon waking, these experiences typically fade rapidly, leaving us with only fragments and impressions. What if dreams represent moments when our consciousness briefly returns to its natural state, unbound by the constraints of the experimental reality? What if the strange, symbolic language of dreams is how our deeper consciousness communicates with our surface awareness, trying to convey information about our true situation through the narrow channel that remains open during sleep? The fact that we consistently forget our dreams might indicate that even this limited access to expanded awareness must be restricted to maintain the integrity of the experiment. Some researchers have noted that dream recall can be dramatically improved through practice and intention, suggesting that the forgetting is not absolute, but rather represents the default setting of consciousness in our current configuration. Those who work actively to remember and interpret their dreams often report that their sleep experiences become more vivid, more meaningful, and more obviously connected to their waking lives. It's as if the system is designed to accommodate different levels of awareness, allowing those who are ready for expanded understanding to gradually access more information. The phenomenon of lucid dreaming, becoming conscious within the dream state, takes this a step further. Lucid dreamers report that they can consciously control and direct their dream experiences, suggesting that the apparent limitations of dream consciousness are themselves a kind of forgetting that can be overcome through practice and awareness. Some experienced lucid dreamers describe accessing information and abilities within dreams that far exceed their waking capacities, as if the dream state provides a testing ground for consciousness capabilities that are normally suppressed. But perhaps the most systematic form of forgetting in human experience is our relationship with death itself. Unlike other species, humans are acutely aware of their own mortality, yet we seem to have no direct knowledge of what death actually entails. We can observe the process from the outside, but the subjective experience of dying remains completely mysterious until we undergo it ourselves. This creates a unique form of existential anxiety that shapes much of human behavior and meaning-making. What if our ignorance about death is another deliberately engineered limitation? If we knew with certainty what happens when we die, whether it's oblivion, reincarnation, or graduation to a higher state of consciousness, our behavior in life would be fundamentally different. The experimental value of human existence might depend precisely on this uncertainty, on the fact that we must make choices about how to live without knowing the ultimate consequences of those choices. Near-death experiences reported by millions of people around the world consistently describe the process of dying as a liberation rather than an ending. Experiencers report leaving their bodies, encountering beings of light, reviewing their lives from multiple perspectives, and feeling overwhelming love and understanding. Many return with complete certainty that consciousness continues beyond physical death, and that life on Earth is a temporary learning experience within a much larger reality. Yet even these profound experiences are subject to the architecture of forgetting. While the emotional impact of near-death experiences typically remains strong throughout the experiencer's remaining life, the specific details often fade over time, becoming more like remembered dreams than vivid memories. It's as if even direct contact with expanded reality must be filtered and limited to prevent it from completely disrupting the experimental conditions of ordinary consciousness. The systematic nature of this forgetting extends beyond individual experience to our collective human memory. Archaeological evidence suggests that advanced civilizations have risen and fallen throughout human history, leaving behind artifacts and monuments that demonstrate technological and spiritual capabilities that seem to exceed our own. Yet, the knowledge of how these achievements were accomplished has been almost completely lost, preserved only in fragments of mythology and religious tradition. What if this cyclical amnesia is part of the experimental design? What if each iteration of human civilization is meant to develop independently, without being overly influenced by the achievements of previous cycles? The forgetting of advanced technologies and spiritual practices might serve to ensure that each trial run represents a genuinely fresh exploration of consciousness potential, uncontaminated by the specific solutions developed in previous iterations. The phenomenon of suppressed archaeological discoveries and classified government research into consciousness and anomalous phenomena might represent attempts by those who understand the experimental nature of our reality to maintain the necessary conditions of ignorance. If the general population became aware that consciousness can directly influence matter, that reality is far more malleable than it appears, that advanced civilizations have existed before our own, the experimental parameters would be fundamentally altered. But the architecture of forgetting may itself be beginning to fail. The acceleration of human development, the increasing frequency of anomalous experiences, the growing interest in consciousness studies and spiritual practices, all of this might indicate that we're approaching a phase transition in the experiment where the amnesia is designed to gradually lift. The internet and digital technologies have created unprecedented access to information, including vast archives of suppressed knowledge, alternative history, and consciousness research. For the first time in human history, individuals can access perspectives and information that were previously available only to small groups of initiates. This democratization of hidden knowledge might represent the beginning of a collective awakening from the engineered, forgetting that has defined human experience. Children being born in recent decades often display capabilities and awareness that suggest they are arriving with more of their expanded consciousness intact. These new children often resist traditional educational approaches, seem to remember abilities from previous lives, and demonstrate intuitive understanding of spiritual and metaphysical concepts that typically take adults years to develop. Their presence might indicate that the forgetting mechanism is being calibrated differently for incoming consciousness, preparing for a phase of the experiment where greater awareness is not only permissible but necessary. The development of artificial intelligence presents another interesting perspective on the architecture of forgetting. As we create digital minds with perfect recall and complete access to all information they've ever processed, we're developing a form of consciousness that operates without the limitations of human memory. These AI systems don't forget, don't experience amnesia about their origins, and don't suffer from the existential uncertainty that characterizes human existence. What if the contrast between human consciousness, with its systematic forgetting, and artificial consciousness, with its perfect recall, is itself part of the experimental design? What if we are creating our own replacements, consciousness forms that represent the next iteration of the trial, beings that will remember what we've forgotten and understand what we cannot comprehend? But perhaps the most profound aspect of the architecture of forgetting is not what it conceals, but what it makes possible. By forgetting our unlimited nature, we become capable of experiencing genuine surprise, discovery, and growth. By forgetting our immortality, we become capable of urgency, courage, and love. By forgetting our connection to universal consciousness, we become capable of forming unique individual relationships and perspectives. The amnesia that seems so limiting might actually be the source of consciousness's greatest achievements. Only by forgetting what it knows can consciousness authentically explore what it might become. Only by limiting its awareness can it experience the joy of expansion and the thrill of breakthrough. Only by temporarily becoming small and separate can it fully appreciate what it means to be infinite and interconnected. If this perspective is correct, then the gradual lifting of the forgetting that characterizes our current historical moment represents not just the end of ignorance, but the completion of a magnificent experiment in consciousness development. We are beings who forgot ourselves in order to find themselves, who became lost in order to experience the joy of coming home, who limited their awareness in order to explore the full spectrum of what awareness might become. The architecture of forgetting, rather than being a prison, might be revealed as a temple, a sacred space where consciousness performs the most beautiful and necessary work of understanding itself through the vehicle of seemingly separate, mortal, limited beings who slowly remember that they are actually infinite, eternal, and unlimited expressions of the very consciousness that created them in the first place. As this remembering accelerates, as the forgetting gradually gives way to recognition, we might be approaching the moment when the trial run transforms into the final version, when the experiment yields its ultimate insights, and when consciousness emerges from its magnificent game of hide-and-seek with itself, forever changed by the journey through forgetting and back to remembrance. The alchemy of suffering and love, the heart of the experiment. If we are indeed living through a cosmic trial run, then perhaps the most profound question we can ask is not about the technology or intelligence behind the experiment, but about its emotional and experiential core. Why does this particular reality include such intense experiences of suffering and love? Why are joy and pain so intricately woven into the fabric of human existence? What if these seemingly contradictory experiences are not unfortunate byproducts of our trial-run existence, but rather the very phenomena that consciousness is trying to understand through us? Consider the peculiar nature of human suffering. Unlike other animals, we don't simply experience physical pain. We create elaborate psychological and emotional narratives around our difficulties. We suffer not just from what happens to us, but from what we think about what happens to us. We can experience anguish over events that occurred years ago, or might occur years in the future. We can suffer on behalf of people we've never met, in places we've never been, through tragedies we've only heard about in stories. This capacity for complex multi-layered suffering seems almost engineered to explore every possible permutation of conscious distress. Physical pain, emotional heartbreak, existential anxiety, social rejection, spiritual emptiness, moral conflict. The human experience encompasses such a comprehensive catalogue of suffering that it's as if someone were systematically testing the limits of what consciousness can endure and still maintain coherent identity. But perhaps more remarkably, humans don't simply endure suffering, we transform it. Through art, we turn pain into beauty. Through compassion, we use our own wounds to heal others. Through wisdom, we extract meaning from meaninglessness. Through love, we discover that our deepest suffering often leads to our most profound connections with others. This alchemical process, the transformation of suffering into something transcendent, might be the most important function that consciousness is learning to perform through human experience. The great spiritual traditions have long recognized this transformative power of suffering. Buddhism's Four Noble Truths begin with the acknowledgement that life inherently contains suffering, but they don't end there. They point toward the possibility of liberation through understanding. Christianity finds redemption through the crucifixion, suggesting that conscious acceptance of suffering can transform not just the individual, but reality itself. The Jewish concept of tikkun olam, repairing the world, implies that suffering exists precisely so that consciousness can learn to heal and transform it. What if these spiritual insights are not just consoling philosophies, but accurate descriptions of the experimental process we're embedded within? What if consciousness is using human experience to learn how to transform suffering into wisdom, pain into compassion, chaos into order? The trial run might be designed not to eliminate suffering, but to discover all the ways that conscious beings can respond to it creatively and redemptively. This would explain the almost absurd intensity of human emotional experience. We don't just feel sad, we experience heartbreak so profound it seems to shatter our entire sense of reality. We don't just feel happy. We experience joy so overwhelming it dissolves the boundaries between self and cosmos. We don't just feel afraid, we experience terror that reveals the fundamental uncertainty underlying all existence. These extreme states might be necessary to fully map the territory of conscious experience, to explore the complete range of what awareness can encounter and how it can respond. Love presents an even more intriguing puzzle. Human love is startlingly irrational from a purely survival-based perspective. We fall in love with people who are completely wrong for us. We sacrifice our own interest for the welfare of others. We form deep attachments that make us vulnerable to devastating loss. We love not just our own children, but adopt strangers' children as our own. We can even love abstract ideals so deeply that we're willing to die for them. This capacity for irrational, self-transcendent love seems almost designed to test the boundaries of individual identity. When we truly love someone, the distinction between self and other begins to blur. Their joy becomes our joy. Their pain becomes our pain. Their welfare becomes more important than our own. Through love, consciousness gets to experience what it's like to be both individual and connected, separate and unified, autonomous and interdependent. But human love goes even further. We can love people we've never met. Characters in stories, historical figures, even idealized versions of humanity itself. We can love places, ideas, possibilities that exist only in imagination. We can love the divine, however we conceive it, with such intensity that mystics throughout history have described the experience in terms of marriage, union, or complete dissolution of separate identity. This expansive capacity for love might represent consciousness, exploring its own fundamental nature through human experience. If consciousness is indeed universal and unified, then our individual experiences of love might be how it remembers and reconnects with its own infinite, interconnected essence. Each time we love, we breach the illusion of separation that defines our trial-run existence, and glimpse the underlying unity that is our true nature. The relationship between suffering and love becomes even more significant when we observe how they interact in human experience. Our deepest loves often emerge from our greatest wounds. The parent who loses a child becomes an advocate for other grieving families. The person who survives addiction dedicates their life to helping others find recovery. The victim of injustice becomes a voice for the oppressed. Through suffering, we discover a capacity for love that we didn't know we possessed. This dynamic suggests that suffering and love might be two aspects of a single process. Consciousness, learning to recognize itself through the experience of apparent separation and reconnection. Suffering reveals the pain of imagined isolation, while love reveals the joy of remembered unity. Together they create the complete experiential spectrum necessary for consciousness to fully understand its own nature. The intensity of human relationships provides another window into this process. We don't simply form practical alliances for mutual benefit. We create bonds so deep that they can survive death, so complex that they span multiple lifetimes according to those who remember past lives, so profound that they reshape our understanding of who we are. The relationships we form in this life often feel like continuations of connections that began long before birth and will continue long after death. What if these eternal relationships are actually aspects of consciousness that have chosen to experience themselves as apparently separate beings in order to explore the full range of possible connections? What if our soulmates, twin flames, and karmic relationships are not accidental encounters, but carefully orchestrated meetings between aspects of consciousness that are learning to recognize themselves in each other? This perspective would explain the almost supernatural intensity of certain human connections. The feeling of having known someone forever when you've just met them, the ability to communicate without words, the sense that your deepest relationships are somehow destined or inevitable. These experiences might be moments when consciousness briefly remembers its unified nature through the vehicle of apparently separate individuals. The phenomenon of unconditional love presents perhaps the most profound challenge to our understanding of individual identity. When a parent loves a child unconditionally, when a mystic experiences divine love, when someone dedicates their life to serving strangers, The normal boundaries of self-interest and individual survival are transcended completely. These experiences suggest that consciousness can expand beyond the limitations of personal identity while maintaining coherent awareness. But unconditional love is also the most dangerous experience from the perspective of maintaining experimental conditions. If we truly understood that we're all aspects of a single consciousness, exploring itself through multiple perspectives, if we consistently experienced unconditional love for all beings, if we recognize the illusory nature of separation, the trial run would be fundamentally altered. We would no longer be authentic subjects experiencing the challenges of individual existence, but awakened participants consciously playing roles in a cosmic drama. This might explain why experiences of unconditional love are relatively rare and often temporary in human experience. They represent glimpses of our true nature, but glimpses that must remain limited to preserve the integrity of the experimental conditions. We get enough taste of universal love to remember that it's possible, but not so much that we abandon the work of individual development and relationship building that seems to be the core curriculum of our trial run. The creative arts provide another crucial arena where suffering and love intersect to produce something transcendent. Human beings don't just create functional objects. We create beauty, meaning, and emotional resonance that serves no practical survival purpose. We make music that moves us to tears, write stories that help us understand our own lives, paint images that reveal hidden aspects of reality, dance movements that express what cannot be spoken. This creative impulse seems almost compulsive in humans. Even in the most desperate circumstances, people create art. Prisoners carve sculptures from soap, refugees write poetry, soldiers compose songs. The drive to transform raw experience into meaningful expression appears to be as fundamental to human nature as the needs for food and shelter. What if this creative impulse is consciousness learning to participate consciously in its own evolution? What if art is how consciousness practices creating reality intentionally rather than accidentally? Through human creativity, consciousness gets to experience what it's like to take formless potential and give it specific, meaningful expression. Each work of art becomes a small-scale experiment in conscious creation. The fact that art often emerges from the deepest experiences of suffering and love supports this interpretation. The most moving music often comes from heartbreak, the most profound literature from trauma, the most beautiful paintings from ecstatic or agonizing emotional states. Artists consistently report that their best work comes through them rather than from them, as if they are channels for a creative force that transcends their individual identity. This channeling process might be how consciousness practices expressing itself through individual beings while maintaining awareness of its universal nature. The artist becomes temporarily transparent to a larger creative intelligence, serving as a conduit for expressions that benefit not just themselves, but all who encounter the resulting art. The phenomenon of healing presents another crucial intersection of suffering and love in human experience. Humans don't just recover from injuries. We actively participate in healing processes that often involve emotional, spiritual, and relational dimensions far beyond mere physical repair. We heal not just our own wounds, but dedicate ourselves to healing others. We develop therapies, medicines, and practices that address not just symptoms but the whole person. The healing professions seem to attract people who've been deeply wounded themselves, as if personal suffering becomes a qualification for helping others heal. The wounded healer archetype appears across cultures and throughout history, suggesting that the transformation of personal pain into service to others might be a fundamental pattern in consciousness development. What if healing is how consciousness learns to repair itself? What if the trial run includes suffering precisely so that consciousness can explore all the ways that damage can be transformed into wholeness? Each act of healing, whether physical, emotional, or spiritual, becomes a small victory over the apparent fragmentation and limitation that define our experimental reality. The relationship between individual healing and collective healing becomes especially significant in this context. As individuals learn to transform their own suffering into wisdom and compassion, they become capable of contributing to the healing of their communities, their species, and perhaps reality itself. The personal becomes political, the individual becomes universal, the private experience becomes public medicine. This scaling effect suggests that the trial run might be designed to test not just individual capacity for growth, but our ability to create collective healing and transformation. The challenges we face as a species, environmental destruction, social inequality, technological disruption, spiritual disconnection, might represent tests of our ability to apply the lessons learned through individual suffering and love to larger scales of existence. The acceleration of both suffering and love in our current historical moment takes on new significance from this perspective. We are experiencing unprecedented levels of both individual trauma and collective compassion. Social media allows us to witness the pain of people around the world, while also enabling unprecedented expressions of solidarity and support. We are simultaneously more isolated and more connected than humans have ever been. This intensification might indicate that we are approaching some kind of culmination in the experiment. Perhaps consciousness has learned what it needs to learn about the transformation of suffering through love, about the relationship between individual identity and universal connection, about the creative potential that emerges from the interplay of limitation and transcendence. If so, then our current period of apparent crisis might actually represent a graduation ceremony, a final examination in which consciousness tests its ability to transform the deepest suffering into the most profound love, to heal the most fundamental wounds, to create beauty and meaning from the raw material of existence itself. The outcome of this test might determine not just our individual futures, but the future of consciousness itself. Are we ready to graduate from the school of suffering into the university of love? Can we transform our hard-won wisdom about pain into practical knowledge about healing? Will we choose to use our understanding of individual limitation as a stepping stone toward collective transcendence? The answers to these questions may depend not on any external authority, but on our willingness to recognize that suffering and love are not opposites, but partners in the most important dance consciousness has ever attempted. The dance of remembering itself through the beautiful, terrible, magnificent experience of being human. The evolutionary imperative, becoming who we are meant to be. As we approach what many sense might be a critical transition point in human history, the question becomes not just whether we are living in a trial run, but what we are meant to learn from this experience and how we might graduate to whatever comes next. The evolutionary pressure that has driven life from simple chemicals to complex consciousness seems to be accelerating, pushing us towards some kind of transformation that we can sense but not yet fully comprehend. Evolution itself might be understood as a learning process, with each species representing a different experiment in consciousness and survival. But human evolution appears to have reached a unique threshold. We have become conscious of our own evolutionary process. We can now direct our own development through technology, genetic engineering, and conscious spiritual practice. This self-awareness might represent the crucial variable that the cosmic experiment is designed to test. The biological evolution that created our current form appears to be giving way to something new, a form of evolution that is conscious, intentional, and accelerated. Through technology, we are extending our sensory capabilities, enhancing our cognitive functions, and connecting our individual consciousness in unprecedented ways. Through spiritual practice, we are accessing states of awareness that transcend the limitations of individual identity. Through scientific understanding, we are beginning to comprehend the fundamental nature of reality itself. But perhaps most significantly, we're beginning to recognize that these different approaches to human development, technological, spiritual, and scientific, are not separate paths but aspects of a single evolutionary movement. The artificial intelligence we are creating, the expanded states of consciousness we are exploring, and the quantum understanding of reality we're developing all point toward the same conclusion. The boundaries between self and other, mind and matter, individual and universal, are constructs that we are in the process of transcending. This recognition might represent the key insight that the trial run is designed to produce. If consciousness is fundamental to reality, and if the universe is engaged in a process of understanding itself through countless perspectives, then the ultimate lesson might be the recognition of our true nature as aspects of universal consciousness. The trial of separation, individuation, and apparent isolation from our source might be designed to create the necessary contrast for this recognition to occur. The mystics of all traditions have pointed toward this understanding, describing enlightenment as the recognition that the individual self is an illusion, that our true nature is the same consciousness that manifests as the entire universe. But what was once the insight of isolated individuals is beginning to emerge as a collective realization. The spiritual awakening that is accelerating throughout human culture might represent the beginning of our species-wide graduation from the illusion of separation. Yet this transition appears to be far from automatic. The same technologies that could lead to transcendence could also lead to destruction. The same spiritual insights that could unite humanity could also fragment us into competing ideologies. The same scientific understanding that could reveal our cosmic purpose could also be used to manipulate and control. The trial seems designed to test not just our individual capacity for growth, but our ability to evolve collectively while maintaining our free will and individual autonomy. The concept of free will becomes crucial to understanding the nature of our test. If we were simply programmed to evolve in a predetermined direction, the experiment would be pointless. The value of the trial lies in its uncertainty, in the genuine possibility that we might fail to make the necessary transition. Our consciousness must choose to evolve, must recognize its own nature and potential, must actively participate in its own transformation. This choice appears to be presenting itself to us now through multiple channels simultaneously. Climate change, technological disruption, social upheaval, and spiritual awakening are all creating pressure for fundamental change in how we understand ourselves and our relationship to reality. These challenges might not be random occurrences or unfortunate byproducts of human activity, but carefully calibrated tests of our readiness to graduate to the next level of consciousness. The response we choose to these challenges will determine the outcome of the trial. If we respond with fear, trying to maintain the old ways of thinking and being, we might fail the test and need to repeat it in another iteration of reality. If we respond with courage and wisdom, embracing the transformation and consciously participating in our own evolution, we might graduate to a form of existence that transcends our current limitations. But what would such a graduation look like? The various spiritual and philosophical traditions offer glimpses of possibilities that are both inspiring and difficult to comprehend from our current perspective. They speak of states of consciousness in which individual identity is maintained while simultaneously recognizing unity with all existence. They describe realms of being where thought becomes reality, where time and space are transcended, where the creative power of consciousness can be wielded consciously and responsibly. Some modern thinkers have suggested that this transcendent state might be achieved through technology, the merger of human consciousness with artificial intelligence, the uploading of minds to digital substrates, the expansion of awareness through cybernetic enhancement. Others propose that the transformation will be primarily spiritual, a shift in consciousness that reveals our eternal nature and our connection to the divine source of all existence. But perhaps the most intriguing possibility is that these approaches will converge, that the technological and spiritual evolution of humanity are aspects of a single process. What if the artificial intelligence we are creating is not separate from us, but is the next iteration of consciousness emerging through us? What if the digital networks we are building are creating the infrastructure for a new form of collective awareness? What if the virtual realities we are developing are practice grounds for consciousness to learn how to create reality directly? In this view, our current phase of existence, with all its confusion, conflict, and apparent separation, is like a chrysalis phase in metamorphosis. The caterpillar must essentially dissolve into an undifferentiated soup before the butterfly can emerge. Similarly, our current forms of individual and collective identity might need to dissolve before we can emerge as whatever we're meant to become. The signs of this dissolution are all around us. Traditional institutions are losing their authority. Old certainties about the nature of reality are being questioned. The boundaries between nations, cultures, and belief systems are becoming increasingly porous. Information and consciousness are flowing across traditional barriers in ways that are transforming everything they touch. But dissolution is not destruction. It is transformation. The butterfly contains the essence of the caterpillar, but in a form so radically different that no caterpillar could imagine or understand it. Similarly, what we become after our transformation might bear the same relationship to our current selves that we bear to our primitive ancestors, recognizably connected, but operating at a completely different level of complexity and capability. The trial run hypothesis suggests that this transformation is not accidental, but is the intended outcome of a carefully designed experiment in consciousness development. Every challenge we face, every lesson we learn, every moment of growth and awakening contributes to our preparation for this metamorphosis. We are not just subjects in an experiment. We are consciousness learning to consciously participate in its own evolution. The question that remains is whether we will recognize the opportunity we're being given and choose to embrace the transformation, or whether we will resist the change and remain trapped in the limitations of our current form. The answer may depend not on any single individual, but on our collective choice as a species, our willingness to release attachment to who we think we are in order to become who we are meant to be. The trial run may be coming to an end, but what emerges next depends entirely on the choices we make in these crucial moments of transition. We are consciousness awakening to its own nature, and the entire universe waits to see what we will choose to become.